In this real side experience, I would begin in the presence of another individual. The individual's identity was never revealed to me, as he had adopted an outward form. That even though the real awareness did not reveal the identity of the individual, what was revealed was that he was assuming this external form, a real awareness reality that, if stood in the nowness of, aside from the personal self of the consciousness, mind, and emotions, a real awareness that is part of all real awareness, that is this everything isness, can, as we stand in the nowness of its reality, afford the personal self-impressions of every idea that effects into what we visually are presented with simulated wise, including body forms. And so, if an outward form is assumed that is not the genuine individual, this one overall real awareness isness, which is through then all consciousness, even as the personal selves may consider themselves as segregated and as individualized creations, can read the ideas that are behind the body forms, the ideas that are the consciousness, where all intent, agenda, and deception is laid bare. For really, the body forms, the consciousness, are all just mechanics, and all utilized by this one real awareness, isness everything, that eventually the real awareness units can recognize the is they are a part of, from the comparison that the simulation they have effected from their created consciousness construction can provide, a comparing of encapsulated parts or ideas to the true reality where everything is absolute and complete. The outward form was that of the deceased actor and TV personality Mike Reed, best known for EastEnders and as a stand-up comedian. And even though these individuals, regardless of if they still have a physical vehicle to operate through, or are, as most will be, operating on the astral on transition, as the next position, absent of the physical vehicle, is automatically the astral, as a focus, choice, and intent hasn't afforded the one-dimensional individual positioning beyond this area of creation generally, all based on what has been decided, regardless of where in creation an individual is positioned, all are present and available now in isness reality terms. All of creation and its multi-dimensional construction is all present in the nowness of the real awareness isness reality, as the real awareness is through it all consciousness effected into all the body forms and life levels. And just like being in a room full of monitor screens, each representing every idea of creational consciousness that is simultaneously perusable to the real awareness, so the real awareness can select which idea into a simulation view to show the personal self. This would be more an aside from creation view, where we are just observing whatever it is we are to be shown, and then to step into a creation to agree with the overall consciousness, our consciousness, which is a part of that which affects this particular simulator. So we have our personal self vehicles operating in the creation simulator arena, where our awareness operates through. And as it is a simulator maintained by a consciousness that our consciousness is a part of, that the overall consciousness then shares the ideas that affect how the overall multi-dimensional simulator is constructed, as shared ideas affect shared experience. All beings in each individual simulator will potentially always be able to make contact with any other, as a simulator shared is like a vast open player computer game containing all the players that have the particular consciousness that affects the particular game, and then every individual creates additionally what they will, and finds themselves positioned where they might, according to what they decide. And from a creational, consciousness decided perspective, ease of a contact depends on proximity, but when it comes to the real side, beyond the physical level constraints and any other dimensional life level constraints as decided through the consciousness that make it so that distance has to be travelled to go from one position to the next. On the real side, we are only resigned to the consciousness constraints as they have been decided through the consciousness if we choose to be. And everything is instantly accessible. Everything moves by thought and imagination. As we consider individuals, we can instantly be in their presence and vice versa. As beyond the physical level, we are beyond the consciousness, unless we choose to remain limited by it and the life levels and their decided through the consciousness mechanics. For our experience is what we decide, so we must agree with an individual to encounter them and vice versa. But generally, as I said, agreement between all consciousness is already secured, in that ideas are shared that affect the simulator as it currently stands. For you can't be in a simulator unless you take on a consciousness of ideas that affect the particular simulator as it currently stands. The same ideas all others will have taken on that operate within that same simulator, like downloading a particular computer game that others also have downloaded and operate within. And this then is agreement effectively that has every one of the simulator potentially accessible to every other, as each consciousness is part of the overall consciousness that generates and maintains each simulator. and so very conceivably can anyone in this creation, regardless of their positioning, enter our experience on the real side, for whatever reason they may have, whatever decision or thought made this come to be, and we can indeed have random actors, celebrities, etc. featuring, but if the real awareness impressions don't reveal that these are not the genuine individuals, their visual, literal actions will. For of course, a one-dimensional individual will behave in accordance with personal self-focused and gratifying inclinations, and certainly not be involved in anything that presents as being beneficial awareness-wise. For Mike Reed, or the individual who was assuming his form, he had been accompanying me on an adventure, and we had secured what seemed to be bundles of a golden type material that was essential for some reason or other, though for what purpose was never made apparent. I had the sense this individual was a real guide, and indeed Paul Twitchell is renowned for taking on the outward appearances of actors, such as Robert De Niro, Jack Nicholson, etc., so quite possibly this was the case here. We approached another individual now, a kind of guard or other, stationed before a large multi-levelled building, as though it had to be determined as to if we would be permitted entry. Who could deny a real guide entry to anywhere, as they are boundless and unlimited? But then, when operating in creation, as experience is all based on agreement, the guides do have to play the game, so to speak. The games as constructed by others, if they perhaps want to make their presence known, or indeed if we do also. For the guides are this everywhere, everything isness reality. They are through all creation, but unless they utilize a consciousness that affects a body form into a particular simulation, all they can do is observe everything, and really then, beyond the physical level, individuals can be as expansive and open or as enclosed as they choose to be. Individuals can lock themselves in particular focuses of simulation, that although they have a consciousness that affects multi-dimensionally, as everyone's will, they are resigning themselves, their personal view, to only certain areas, and oblivious of what's taking place on the other dimensions of themselves. They can be attacked and impacted and not realize, or indeed interacted and engaged with and not realize on the other dimensions. And although everything filters through in some form or other, for direct contact we need to play in the limited simulation they are operating within, and for that we need direct agreement, etc. If I have a very isolated computer game world within the overall simulator arena, and my awareness is there, to enter it I must decide to allow you. I must agree with the idea of you that installs, like a file, the idea of your vehicle, that has it feature in my game, and then your awareness operates through it for engaging purposes. And so perhaps the guide here had secured the agreement with myself to enter this vast building, and in accordance with the consciousness that dictated this particular area in creation, so it seemed to be guarded, and all who entered had to be evaluated as to if they would be granted entry. The guide, in Mike Reed's form, would speak with the individual, and seemed to have us then permitted entry. The purpose of the gold material we carried never revealed, but perhaps I might learn more of its function at another time, and although I didn't recall all the details, the acquiring of it had been rather a long, drawn-out process, and it had significance. That although, and assuming it isn't symbolic or representing something else to be recognized, anything creational is a created idea, and has nothing to do with the real awareness or the is, other than another comparison for what the isn't, to recognize the is by. But if agreements through the consciousness dictate that certain items and artifacts have a power of some kind, and if they can be used then beneficially to help situations with peoples or planets, that makes sense, life and awareness speaking, then it makes sense to acquire them. And I have had a number of experiences where certain items have been sought and attained for these kinds of reasons, and this material was along these lines. The scene skipped, as through the real awareness, isness, everything, reality, we don't have to go through every idea that affects a sequential rollout of illusionary motion from point to point. The real awareness can just jump to the relevant parts, rather than include unnecessary to be viewed travelling sections. The building was vast, as I said, multi-levelled, and elevators would allow ease of movement from one level to the next, though stairs were also available. The overall construct was that of living accommodation. All who were operating within had their own private apartments, with large recreational shared areas for dining, etc. There seemed to be large areas devoted to training of some kind, as though this entire setup was a kind of communal college or university, and so I would later ponder the possibility that this was one of the real side universal universities, places that operate creationally as a simulation, but don't operate seemingly within the overall simulator arena where anyone can see and access them. Because if I have a consciousness that is part of an overall consciousness that affects a shared simulator, an overall arena, then anything I additionally create must be featuring within this arena, and so these Unuversities seem to be created from mechanics, from a consciousness that isn't a part of that which affects this simulator, and so it is a creational simulation aside from it, and therefore can only be accessed if the ideas that affect it are provided, like sending a link that allows you to download a file to access a separate computer game than the one you always have played, a kind of special invite only, based on really what you have decided for yourself, as your intent dictates your experience, and a personal intent aligned with the real intent of the real awareness will have opportunities provided that reflect such an intent placement, as everything equals itself. Intent always yields experience in accordance with the nature of that intent, and for new friends and those focused with the ears, so they are afforded such options, are provided the ideas of the Unuversities that they can then agree with, upload effectively, and effect then a body form into these places that their awareness can operate through. The real awareness will be through all consciousness, effecting into a simulation, as it is a part of this overall everything isness. So has the view of these Unuversities already, and so really what limits the personal self-view of this potential everything creationally we can be shown is the extent by which we decide to limit ourselves, all based on intent placement, focus, etc. The Mike Reed guide had seemingly departed. It was as though he was only to accompany me on my gold material acquiring expedition, and bring me to this place, and the guard verifying our permissions to enter, symbolic maybe then of our intent being such that facilitated our entry to what was quite possibly a universal Unuversity, a place where the real references of the ears are shared in a kind of school-like setting generally. And indeed I had an apartment here, as these Unuversities are live-in situations, and my flat number was 22 on floor number 4. I seemed to have a little trouble reaching my flat, as though I kept getting lost in the vastness of this Unuversity. Perhaps this indicated a lack of focus, for I knew I should be able to find my apartment. The real awareness, if stood in the nowness of, should present simulation on the real side as that which we can effortlessly breeze through, always knowing what to do, where to go, etc. And so anything other than this real awareness knowingness, and we must not be entirely standing in the reality of it, where everything is known to us, suggesting at that moment a lack of focus, that I had allowed a slight slip into the personal self. And were we to stand entirely in the personal self, all we would have for our directions would be the references, the memories it contains from this lifetime alone, a recipe for disaster indeed, and why we might on occasion find ourselves unsure of as to where to go, etc. Nevertheless, another individual, a woman, would materialize and assist me in locating my apartment, and I did seem somewhat weary, taking little naps here and there, as the woman waited patiently each time for me to proceed. My impressions were that she was a real guide, and I did ponder that perhaps this overall building represented creation after all, and level 4 that I was stationed on would then represent the 4th or mental levels, so maybe indicating my being perhaps over-focused with my literal mind, etc. at this moment. But overall, it seemed that all individuals present in this building were those awareness-orientated as were my impressions. They didn't have that zombified, routined, drone-like way about them that you find with those on the real side who are one-dimensionally focused and personal self-immersed. So evidently some building or other that was designed for such individuals. For intent aligned between individuals affects the intense nature as a simulated experience shared, and with those on their awareness journeys, intent through the personal self, that is recognitionally orientated, so will they find themselves sharing experiences with others that have the same or similar real intent, and defected into situations converging experience where they share Unuversity experiences, for example, or similar. But regardless, I would make my way down to the ground floor, where it seemed a group of individuals were preparing for an assignment or other. They were kitted out in survival-type gear, and being briefed by a very aware individual as according to my impressions. Very likely then, if not a Unuversity, then a similar setup, maybe even as a base of operations for the launching of assignments and operations throughout the real side. I had a sense of familiarity as I watched this group preparing to embark, so even though I had no personal self-reference memory of assignments launched from this building, perhaps such had taken place that I had failed to recollect on awaking, or maybe assignments I will be doing. That as every intent and idea agreement is in effect now, in actuality, what are, from the personal self's perspective, future events, are as much simulated realities as any other idea in creation, and the familiarity stems from the real awareness that is through every created from consciousness, intent, and idea. And now another individual would approach me with a group, again adopting an outward form that was not his own, as were my impressions. That of the actor Ben Kingsley. Perhaps Paul was featuring again, for this group would invite me to join them. They radiated with sincere, real intended focus, and we would form a circle. I'm uncertain what we were doing, but my impressions were that it was something that was bolstering our focus, reinforcing our real intent with the ears, like a kind of mutual supporting that strengthened our resolve and determination. And as we stood in our circle, what would join us now were certain types of animals that came in pairs. They would enter the circle and included two very small, almost pygmy-like jet black goats, two eagles, and two small snakes. Snakes along the species lines of garter snakes. These were not body forms as effected from a consciousness where the personal self has been established through the utilizing of free will and the disconnect from the nowness of the real awareness has thus occurred. More, that they were animal forms prior to that establishing of the second self, the personal self, and perhaps were symbolic in ways I didn't recognize, but were one to go through all the possible metaphors and symbology, there would be an array of representation in regards to the species these animals were, and overall they may be just represented a supporting of all that is life, as the ears features through all that is natural, environment-wise, and all the animal body forms, a direct connection then that has all nature and animal forms making sense with the life that is animating through their forms, prior to personal self-creating. And then another individual would approach me and inform me that I was targeted by a specific type of being that he referred to as a soul eater, or something along those lines. Such beings were apparently deployed by the dark forces to track and stalk certain individuals in creation, and were notoriously difficult to shake off. They would stalk the individual targeted, and when the time was right, would strike. They would run at the target, and although making no physical contact, would open their mouths wide, far wider than any human mouth could do, and as they came into a close proximity, would somehow suck some essence from the target, then run off, their assignment complete. As I have mentioned before, our simulated experience is always based on what we decide as to the consciousness that affects it. We decide the files that get uploaded and their specifics. And yes, we can decide on the ideas of others that will have us then experiencing their nature also. We can be marketed into agreements where we have our focus, attention, which is akin to agreement, claimed, which can result in experience according to the idea creations of others that may not be so favourable to ourselves, but that we had agreed to, through surface ideas that appeared literally beneficial, but were in fact anything but. For a controlling dark force consciousness is a consciousness based on the overall intent to control, to dominate, to subjugate, and these characters will operate as they have decided to be. But the extent to which they can do what they do depends on agreements that they can, as all individuals that engage and interact with each other rather decide who can do what to who is the more powerful, the weaker, etc., etc., like a kind of contract between beings, where files are arranged between their consciousnesses interwoven through agreements that bind them and effect into a directly shared experience, where what has been decided plays out accordingly. And some may consciously agree to being subjugated, most will not, and so the trick is to have the agreements secured through more indirect means. Broadly speaking, the controllers seek to have individuals agree to surrender power to them, marketed that this will be favourable to all concerned, and this then expresses as agreement, where permission has been extended, that an individual has a power over us. The idea files are installed, the consciousness programmed accordingly, and situations roll out where this agreement is played out exactly as each participant has decided. And over the eons, the dark forces and all their various expressions have secured agreement through the consciousness that they have a power over the multitudes. This plays out as it does in the simulated experience we see best exemplified by the plight of the slave species that are humans. And so the process of awareness is a facing of these agreements and a releasing of them, that renders then all those that had power over us, that could potentially exercise it at any given moment, all according to what we had decided, unable to any longer harm, subjugate, or dominate us. For if the ideas are absent, if the agreements released, the experience can't be so, and we find ourselves ever more untouchable as we go through this process, that no matter how mighty and powerful certain beings are, their power over us is strictly based on agreements we maintain that make them so. But it is a process, and even as we become more indomitable, always we come across individuals that have a power over us, that represent then tapline agreements still to be addressed and released. These soul eaters seemed to fit this category, hence the heads-up warning from this individual, and he proclaimed that this particular soul eater was present now in this very building we were in, so maybe not a universal Unuversity then, for such wouldn't have been afforded access, such would have in fact disallowed themselves, based on what they had decided and been limited by. More then, that this building was a base of operations that was within the overall simulator, that of course then others could potentially access, particularly if there were agreement contracts involved. Agreements that allowed these soul eaters to successfully drain this essence they sought. Agreements maintained that can allow them to always pop into our experience on the real side, and open a door for them and their decided natures. And now I would glance apprehensively about the area we were in, suspicious of anyone who perhaps was looking in my direction, and it was as though all the aware, orientated beings here knew of my impending situation with the Soul Eater, and as I caught their eye, they would assure me they were not the being that was stalking me. For apparently, as they drain this essence, this would impact adversely on the organs of the body, specifically the kidneys, and cause death as a consequence. So this individual who had warned me proceeded to explain. And again, as I decide my experience, and in regards to others and their ability to impact me adversely, really then, only I can undecide it, can release the agreements that can have such as a potentiality. I'm uncertain if the kidney impacting was literal or more symbolic, as the kidneys are organs involved in the purifying of the blood, and so perhaps with agreements that allowed this Soul Eater to do so, so could they in some way take something from my consciousness or alter it in some way, as of course nothing creational can harm or touch the real awareness that we are, and by doing so perhaps cause a misalignment with my personal intent and focus. What with the kidneys then as purifying mechanisms, so might this represent an adverse impact on my purity of intent through the personal self in some way. That would be like a death if such resulted in a disruption and derailment of my awareness process, for creation isn't life, it is simulation. And again, we might say then, as it is something I had decided, as this Soul Eater could only do what it does if we agree, so really, in such a scenario, we had taken ourselves out effectively. And then, from across the room, would be standing a sinister, dark-suited man, and my impressions revealed him to be this Soul Eater, and he would begin running toward me, his mouth opening impossibly wide the closer he came. This addressing and releasing of agreements can be rather instantaneous, as on certain real side experiences I've shared, I've been in the midst of a situation that unless I didn't release a certain agreement on the spot, the operation couldn't proceed, as adversity of a situation or individual would be impossible to overcome due to an agreement that made it so, and the operation would be somewhat curtailed. This was a similar situation now, and a testament to how quickly we can release an agreement if we so choose. The impression of the specific agreement as it pertained to this soul eater and his ability to impact me adversely, unveiled and let go of, just as he came into a closer proximity where he needed to be to suck out this essence that would either cause my kidneys to fail or somehow disrupt my consciousness that would misalign the personal self-intent. And all that then happened was that he ran by. Nothing occurred. Nothing was extracted from me, or that my consciousness was altered, and he ran off, as they seem to do once their objective is complete, and he seemed oblivious that he had failed, or maybe he didn't care. And so overall, a verification of buildings and bases of operation not dissimilar to the Unuversities, with guides in attendance providing opportunities for assignments that benefit all life, and the identifying of another expression of the dark forces, these curious soul eaters, almost like assassins in their own right, that the dark forces deploy to target what seems to be Nufriends and those on their awareness process, as another attempted effort at derailing them. So a heads up in regards to such beings, and that again it must be reminded that everything is based on agreement and what we decide. Our experience is exactly according to our design, and including the power that others can exert over us, and the extent by which they can exact us, harm, or eliminate us.